Welcome to Real Python Code Conversations. I'm Philipp, and today I will challenge my teammate Martin with a coding challenge. I want him to create a function that accepts a string, and the function should return a string with each character in the original string doubled. So if the function takes the word Martin, I want the function to return MMAARRTTIINN. While Martin tries to solve this coding challenge, you will learn a few things along the way. You will learn how to tackle a coding challenge, why functions are a good idea, how to communicate your thoughts in a coding interview, what happens when you import a module, and when you should use if dunder name equals dunder main. In addition to solving the coding challenge, Martin will even go a few steps further and create some tests. He will also show which conventions about tests exist and what test-driven development is. Real Python Code Conversations is an unfiltered video course format. Martin and I will have a conversation about the code he writes. The session was recorded in one go, but I will jump in now and then to explain some things. All right, let's get started. In this part, you will see how Martin tackles the coding challenge, how he sorts his thoughts, and how he writes the first lines of code. Welcome everyone to another Real Python Code Conversation. My name is Philipp. I'm one of the core content creators at Real Python, and joining me today is Martin. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Philipp.
I've got a code challenge for you. I sent it over to you beforehand so you could have a look at it. And the idea of this session is that you solve this little code challenge and I ask you questions and you walk me through the code, and hopefully our viewers learn a little bit about one thing or another.
Cool.
The question I was having for you, the code challenge, is create a function that accepts a string. The function should return a string with each character in the original string doubled. So for example, if you put in Martin, then it should return MMAARRTTIINN.
Got it.
So your first thoughts about this challenge? Like I said, you already got it beforehand, but once you got it, was there anything about this challenge unclear, or what were your first thoughts when you saw it?
So first thoughts, I guess, always when I get a challenge, I have a short moment of being like, am I going to be able to do this? But this one it's relatively straightforward. And then usually when I sit down to just piece it apart, stuff goes relatively easily. So this was my first thought. Maybe that's also interesting to know that even if we've been coding for a bit, sometimes there's a moment of just being like confused about a question. But I think it's relatively clear. You wrote it out quite clearly. And the instructions that I just reformatted so they fit nicely on my screen here just give me a chance to basically go step by step here. And you also have an example there. So this is nice to see that I also, if I didn't entirely understand the instructions here, I get an example that clarifies it some more.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that you just reformatted this question, right? I mean, it's not even a question, like a challenge, because there is no question mark in the end. The instructions, right? Because I think just like with code in general, it sometimes helps to have it formatted in a way that makes it better readable for yourself. So I think now with the different lines, it's kind of like 3 instructions how you could actually start coding. Like the first one is create a function that accepts a string. Like, okay. So is this how you would start now?
So actually, I don't think I would start with a function. Even though it's pretty explicit in here in your instructions, I would probably just see if I can get the code to work on a script basis. Let me try it out. So what I'd start with first is, I don't really know where's the input going to come from, right? I assume that it should be possible to handle input from separate sources, but I don't want to deal with this at the moment. So I'm just going to make an example string that I'm going to use for developing the code here. And let's stick with this one so we can also compare. So I have this example string, and then I would just continue on a script basis. I want to loop here because I want to see each character in the original string. So I'm probably going to need a loop, right? So for character in example string, or let's call it word. It's a little more reusable later. For character in word, so I'm going to loop over each of those characters, and then I want just to double up each of them. Now, I need to save this somewhere. So I'm going to make a new variable here that I'm going to call double. And it just starts off as an empty string.
Mm-hmm.
And then in here in my for loop, I want to then address this and fill up the variable. And so maybe that's interesting to see, right? You don't necessarily write the first line, then you write the second line, then you write the third line. But I'm kind of following my thought process here with, okay, I need some input. And then I'm like, okay, I got to do some looping. So I start with the for loop. This is not even a valid for loop right now, right? Because I have an error sitting down here because I indented the code, but I didn't do anything in there, right? So nicer would be to write pass as a placeholder. Then you also see that VS Code isn't complaining that there's an error in there. But then at this point, I was like, okay, I'm going to need a place to hold the new string that I'm creating because strings are immutable. So I can't change the original string. I'm going to need a new one. And I need that one before I start doing anything in the for loop because otherwise I would just keep overriding the value.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, and like just back up a little bit, like you created a new Python file, double.py, and that's where I posted the instructions and that where you're in right now. So basically the code that you're having right now, you would just run the file and see like if it works, if there are errors in this state.
I'd open up my terminal and then I can say Python. So I'm in the folder where I created the file. I have double.py in this folder. And now I can say Python 3 double.py and then it runs. It doesn't bring any errors now because I added the pass statement. If I didn't, then we'd end this with an error, with a syntax error.
Yeah, I think this is sometimes at the beginning a very good sign if a file does nothing. So sometimes at the beginning there is an error thrown because there is a variable you're using that is undefined, or you're importing maybe an external package that is not installed yet. But like you just did, just running the file and not getting anything back is a good sign at the beginning.
Right. And I could do also something like put a placeholder print in here or print each character while I'm iterating over it. So then looking at the output is a little more interesting because then you actually see that the loop is working and it's addressing each character separately.
Martin now is in the middle of solving the coding challenge. But before we continue, let's recap a little bit how he tackled the coding challenge. He started by sorting his thoughts and communicated how he understands the challenge. That's very vital because if you're in a coding interview, for example, it's very good that you're on the same page like the interviewer. So if you misunderstand the question, the coding interviewer can clarify a few things for you. You may ask questions if it wasn't clear. In this case, Martin understood the coding challenge completely right, and he started coding. That's also a good thing to not think about it too much, but just get your feet wet and start coding. And also be okay with not being perfect right away. It's better to start a little bit of code and get started instead of thinking of the perfect solution and trying to get there, but take one step after another. So far, Martin coded everything plainly in the file. In the next part, he will use functions to structure the code, and he will also explain why functions are a good idea. In the last part, Martin started the coding challenge, and he wrote everything plainly in the file. In this part, he will use functions to structure the code and also explain why functions are a good idea.
Okay. I don't want to print the character. What I want to do is double each of them. So I already have access to each of the characters as we just saw in the print statement. So now I can just add to this, like overwrite it. And I want the character double. So I'm just going to multiply by 2. This is something you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it also helps if you just jump into a little experimental session and figure out, for example, can I do something like that in Python? Yep, that seems to work. I can just use the multiplication operator on a string, and then I get the string doubled.
Yeah.
So I like to have the terminal also close by where I can just run quick experiments, basically.
It's a little bit like a sketch pad where you are trying out an idea and see if it actually works. So right now you're still having, I was just pointing like that, you're still having the pass, but you don't need a pass anymore because you're inside of the loop. Okay, yeah.
So that should be it, really. I just need to make sure that we also see the value at the end. So I'm going to print it out. And now if I run this double.py, I get the original word that was input in everything doubled up. Looks good.
Perfect.
Looks just like what you wanted me to write here.
So we are almost done, but
right.
not yet. Yeah. So what we're missing, so right now you're just like plainly writing it out from top to bottom in a file. What's the advantage of actually putting this in a function now? Like, couldn't we just leave it like this?
Yeah, it's not very reusable. So in this case, first of all, like the word is hard coded in this file. So if you wanted a different word, you'd have to go in here and change it. For example. And that's going to be fun. Let's look at it with this double P at the end. Look at that.
That's nice. Maybe I should change my name to this, to the screen name.
Much more interesting than mine doubled. Okay. We'll stick with Philipp. So I'd have to go into the file and change this, and I can't really reuse this anywhere else. And also I can't really write any tests for this easily,
Mm-hmm.
If you package your code up into functions, it makes it much more reusable for different things, for testing, but also for using it in other files. So yeah, definitely a good suggestion here. Create a function that accepts a string.
Yeah.
So I could rework this. Let's do it. Oops, verrückt. It's just my hands wrong on the keyboard. Okay.
Yeah, I really like your explanation, because an instruction like this could also be part of an coding interview. And your short answer could have been like, well, actually, it's in the instructions, so that's why I'm creating a function. But usually there is a why behind something, why it might make sense to do something and not just follow instructions blindly, but also knowing why it might make sense in the long run.
Yeah, if you're in a good interview situation, then your interviewer is gonna actually value if you explain your thought process of building something.
Yeah.
Because that's often much more valuable that you have someone who actually can communicate what they're doing and why they're doing it in a certain way. For a work environment, that's super helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm writing this function. I'm gonna call it double characters. And it takes a word as input. And then essentially I can just indent this. The word is already the variable I've been using. So this is going to be the attribute that's passed in here and then used down there. And then instead of printing it, I want to return.
Yeah.
So that it's actually reusable, that there's an output to this function.
That's really good.
And now I would write this magic if under main and under name.
So I've seen this plenty of times. What does it do? Why is it recommended to add like this if dunder name equals dunder main when you want to run a file?
So if I don't have this, all right, and I would run this file now, obviously I'm not calling the function, so nothing's going to happen. But if you'd be importing this file somewhere else, one possibility would be, right, I put a function call here. I say pass in the word. Right now, if you run the file, oops, it's still not printing it. Now, if you run the file...
Yeah, because so far you were just returning it, but there wasn't a print statement to actually show it.
Correct, yeah.
Print function, yeah.
Because I removed the print function here, I had to add it down there to actually get the output back to the console, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I could do this, right? But now if I want to reuse this function in a different module, for example, and that's reusability with functions is a big thing.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, you write this other script and you want to use the double characters function that you have defined in this script. So you go over and you say from double import double characters. And if you had this, now let's actually try it out, right? So let's make a new file in here.
Before we let Martin try out importing the code into another file, let's quickly recap what happened so far. Martin basically solved the challenge. He created a function that takes a string and returns a string with doubled the characters. The most important line here is the one in the for loop. There, he adds the duplicated character, where he is in the word right now, to the double string. So with every iteration of the loop, one character gets duplicated and added to the string, which is then in the end returned from the function. Martin also already said why he thinks a function is a good idea. By using a function, his code is easier to maintain. Functions are reusable and there are less side effects during import. And that's what he's about to show now. In this part, Martin will show you what happens when you import a module. He will also explain the dunder name equals dunder main statement that you already briefly saw in the last part. And he will also mention tests a little bit, although he won't go into detail in this part. We will get to this in one of the next ones. For now, it's mostly about what happens when you import a module.
So let's make a new file in here. Call it, well, that can be the test file, right? I can write some tests for this as well.
Yeah, you were mentioning tests when you were thinking of putting it into a function. You were mentioning it would be easier to test. So that's actually a good,
all right,
good step. So now you're creating a new file and now you want to import the double characters function from double.
Now we're still showing about this dunder main, why it's helpful. So if I say from double, import double characters, it's the function. And then I'm just thinking I want to call it here. I'm going to say double characters and pass in tree or something. Okay. And now if I go ahead and run this, you might expect that you get the tree doubled printed out, and you will. But there's also an additional thing. You can pause for a second and think about what's going to happen. So if I run this, I get both Philipp's name and then the input that I actually put in here printed out. And the reason is just because I have this print statement in this file. And what Python does when you import a module is it executes the script because it needs to define the functions in there, and it assigns Philipp to Word. It also executes this call to print.
Yeah.
And if you'd be wanting to use double characters, the function in any other script, you obviously don't want it to print Philipp's name always, unless, I don't know, if you're a fan,
nice,
maybe.
But not for everybody involved.
So you don't want that, but at the same time, you still want to be able maybe to test the file itself, to just take a look whether it's working. And one thing that is often done in Python scripts is that you make use of the namespace, which when you run a script, then it runs in this namespace called main. And that means that when you run the script directly, but not import it, then this if statement is going to be true, and then the print will happen. And if you import it, then it won't, because then it's running in the namespace of the file. So the namespace is going to be double. And here the namespace is going to be main if you run it directly. So I would move this in here as well, because we don't need to define this word either. And now if I run test double, I'm only going to get the tree. But at the same time, if I run the file directly, I get this if statement is true, and then the indented code here executes. I mean, the point of this is just that you can still see some output from running the script directly, but it doesn't interfere with the possibility for you to import the code somewhere else.
Yeah, that was a really nice explanation in that regard. That basically with using dunder name equals dunder main, and dunder is like a shorthand term for double underscore right here. You can import the file without running the code. But if you actually want to run the code of the script, then everything that's inside of this if statement is executed when you run the file. So basically, you now have this double.py file, which is good for importing, but also good for running on its own.
Cool. So let's write some tests.
As you saw, the if dunder name equals dunder main statement is really handy. The special variable dunder name has the value dunder name inside scripts, but it gets the name of the module inside imported modules. By using this pattern in a Python file, you create code that serves two purposes that are isolated from each other. It's executable as a script, and it's importable as a module. To show this behavior, Martin also created a file with a test prefix. In the next part, he will follow up with this naming and create some tests.